It all started with a nightmare. I remember this vaguely, but I know enough to write about it. I was in my kitchen. My family's kitchen has a sliding glass door heading into the backyard, and a window facing our neighbor's deck. Usually it's sunny and warm, the light coming in natural and comforting. But in the nightmare, it was all pitch black. I couldn't see anything outside. No porch lights next door or the backyard stones and furniture. Nothing. I couldn't move my body, but I was conscious. I was aware. I was lucid, but I couldn't control anything besides the turning of my head and the twisting of my eyes. I wasn't alone though. My mom was there beside me, as silent and unmoving as I was. I asked her what was happening, and she was just as clueless as me. Something like this had never happened. I had never felt so stuck and anxious. I felt like we were waiting for something to happen. Which something did. First, it was a pale and calloused hand against the glass door. Next, an eye. Then another. A face and shoulders. A man stood there in the abyss, smiling. He wore a black leather-like jacket, and his chestnut hair was cut just above his eyes. His face was paled and veiny. But that wasn't the scariest part. His eyes were two white holes, glowing with light and amusement. He stared at me and Mom, unblinking. His smile was that of sharp fangs and chapped lips. He was honestly the most terrifying man I'd ever seen. He inched his way to the handle of the door, starting to pull it centimeter by centimeter open. His amused grin filled with mirth. He was threatening my mother and I without even saying anything. My mom was still. She was so scared that I could feel it rolling off of her. She's a quiet person by nature. She was gaping at the man, her eyes wide and worried. She didn't speak. She was probably too scared to. But I, on the other hand, was filled with rage and starting to scream at him, telling him to stop, to just go away. But he didn't listen, and a part of me already knew that he wouldn't. When the door was open enough for his hand to slide through, gripping the inside of the door, he was practically beaming. By this point I was crying. I didn't know at the time, but this wasn't the worst he would do. I didn't know why I was so horrified. He was halfway through the door, his foot planted on the hardwood of our kitchen, an arm wrapped around the door. I was so terrified. It felt like he was entering my home on his own behalf, like he was doing this for fun, terrorizing me and my mother for shits and giggles. I was still screaming at him to go away. By the time he was basically inside, he stopped and stared right at me. I was shaking. I'm shaking writing this. What he said next, in a gravelly, cold, and malicious whisper, will be stuck in my fucking head for years.
I'll see you soon.
And then I woke up. I'm not sure if I pissed the bed, but my sheets were covered in sweat. I felt hot and shaky. Tears were all over my face. I remember the snot running down my chin. It was absolutely disgusting, and I'm sorry I put that image in your head. I was a mess, and the summer sun lighting up my room did nothing to comfort me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt like I was being watched. But at the time, I was so shaken up, I couldn't really recall what I had dreamed. I showered and cleaned up my room, and as I went about the morning, I started to pick up memories from the nightmare. As soon as I entered my kitchen, it felt like hell erupted into the air. I was so scared again. I was worried and frantic. My mom, who was still in her room, was coming out as I was running out of the kitchen. She looked really tired, and I asked her if she had slept well. She said that she had the same dream as I did. We both remembered, and the realization made it all the more real. I started absolutely losing my shit. My anxiety was bouncing off the walls. My mom hugged me and told me it was just a nightmare, that these sort of things can happen. I believed her in that moment, but shit really hit the fan. I tried to ignore the feeling of someone being in my room. I tried to ignore the fear I had in my kitchen. I just got more and more anxious, and I couldn't handle it, so I slept in the living room. And that's where I am now, still basically living out of there. Thanks for reading. While I'm actually surprised that the Pentagon would actually share UFO sightings, I'm not surprised that they're there, because I've seen 2 myself so far. One time, I was camping with my family in the northern Idaho panhandle a couple of years ago. My dad and I were the last 2 people sitting around the campfire when he looked up at the sky and said, "Whoa, what is that?" I looked up and saw this yellow light zigzagging along in the sky. It was far too high up to be a drone, and it was making such quick back and forth motions across the sky that it seemed impossible for a human to be able to survive traveling like that. We both watched it until it went out of our eyesight. It seemed like maybe a minute or so that we were able to watch it traveling like that. We both couldn't figure out what it could be. Perhaps an unmanned drone? But there aren't any large cities or anything for hours. We thought maybe it was some type of secret government test or something, and maybe that's why they were flying out in the middle of nowhere late at night. But let me know in the comments if you have any other ideas. The other sighting was on 4th of July a few years prior in southern Washington, near the Idaho border. Before the fireworks show started, my friends and I noticed this purple stationary light high up in the sky. Again, way too high to be a drone, and it looked kind of like a star, only purple. We thought this was strange and commented on it throughout the night, and other people around us did too, but it stayed stationary throughout the fireworks show. But once the fireworks ended, it took off very quickly in a straight line and just zipped off out of sight. My friends who were with me all witnessed this as well, and none of us could figure out what it might have been. Both times I saw the UFOs, I was with someone else who saw it too, so I know it wasn't just me. Anyway, if anyone has seen anything similar, I'd love to hear about it. This was when I was in 5th grade. I went with my best friend to her cousin's house for the day. They had a Ouija board that they wanted to play with. This was my first time even seeing one, so I didn't really know what to think. Nothing was scary. We sat around the board, asked questions for the spirits, laughed at how stupid it was and how boring it got real quick. I don't recall us saying goodbye or doing anything you're supposed to do when taking these boards seriously. One of the cousins felt uneasy, so we all gave up the game and went outside to play in the sprinkler, naturally. We come back into the house to eat. A cousin went into his bedroom, where the board and planchette were left lying on the floor, and found the board face up on the ceiling, as if someone had glued it there. They had bunk beds, so one of them climbed to the top bunk with a broom and tried scraping it off the ceiling, but it wouldn't budge. I don't really remember anyone being scared, or relating this to something paranormal. Honestly, at the time, I had no idea what the word meant, or what it would look like. We all thought it was weird as fuck, don't get me wrong, but no one felt scared. After failing to get the board off the ceiling, he gave up, and we searched the room for the planchette, finding nothing. We just went on with the day, leaving the room with the Ouija board stuck to the ceiling. The board did fall off the ceiling on its own in the middle of the night, but the planchette was never found. My friend and I left and went home that evening, without a care in the world. And that night, I was lying in bed about to go to sleep, but I was startled by the image projected onto the back of my eyelids whenever I would close them. Very simple. Black periphery. In the middle looks like an open doorway with white light shining through. But in that doorway stood 2 men, one about a foot taller than the other, but both were just solid black, human figures with top hats. I know, first thing you'll think is Hat Man, and maybe it was, but I'm not sure. Every single time I closed my eyes, I would see them. I wasn't scared per se, more intrigued. It's like when you look at the sun for too long, then close your eyes. You can see all those colored specks, except I was looking into the pitch black, then closing my eyes, and seeing the same non-blurry image on my eyelids. Details about my young years. I was raised by a single alcoholic mom, so besides taking care of my brother, I was alone most of the time. I put alone in quotes because yes, I had friends, but my mind was much more developed and different than everyone else. I was alone in my thinking. We were very poor, so we didn't have television. For indoor fun, I would study the rip-off flashcards that come with my National Geographic magazines. The night in question, before laying in bed, I had learned the alphabet backward, then read some Moby Dick. I was that kid. Anyway, end of rant, back to story. So, I just kept opening and then closing my eyelids to see if the image would go away. I thought maybe my eyes were strained from either writing the alphabet backwards so much or reading with a flashlight under my sheets. I wasn't scared, but wondered if I should have been. I remember thinking, well, this is the way it is now. I guess I'll have to get used to it. And I fell asleep. The next day, I woke up like nothing and went to school and had a normal day. But bedtime came, and it wasn't until I closed my eyes and saw the two men on my eyelids that I remembered the night before. This night, I was more annoyed. Questions ran through my head. Does everyone see something when they try to sleep? Or are they there when I blink too? Again, I just kind of welcomed the new part of growing up I was annoyed with. This started in 5th grade and lasted until 6th grade. Because I specifically remember going to bed one night and not seeing anything and thinking, wow, it's over. I thought it'd last forever. It wasn't until my middle school years, when I became fascinated with the paranormal, that I remembered this and thought it was definitely not normal. I always like to discount all options before concluding paranormal activity, but it irks me more that the event with the Ouija board happened the same day it started. Maybe something was trying to attach to me but couldn't. Maybe because I was more intrigued and annoyed than scared. Last Saturday, June 6, 2020, around dusk, I was driving home when I saw a black mass to the upper left of my peripheral vision. It was about nickel-sized and round from my perspective, but obviously much bigger if it was actually in the sky. I was headed northeast, and I live in northern Arizona. The object appeared to be dead north of me. Now, the strange part. When I tried to look at it, it would disappear from my vision. But when I looked back to the road, it appeared clear in my peripheral. I thought maybe it's just a sunspot, or a reflection, or just my head messing with me. So I focused on other things, and it would remain in the same spot in the sky. Even when I focused on it, I could see a faint outline of it, and it would appear stationary, staying in place as my car moved forward, but only slightly, similar to a mountaintop in the distance. After doing this about 3 or 4 times, I realized I've never seen anything behave like that. I wear contacts and get things in my eyes or have sunspots all the time. I can promise it wasn't a reflection of any kind. So, finally, I asked my girlfriend in the passenger seat if she could see it, with the pretext of, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but... Little did I know, she had been doing the same thing. We agreed that it was actually in the sky, and confirmed we were looking at it from 2 slightly different perspectives. We both were tripping out because initially we both just thought it was in our heads, but couldn't stop looking at it because of how clear it was in our peripheral. Eventually, we lost sight of it as roofs blocked it from view. I thought maybe I would come up with an explanation, but I can't stop thinking about it. It was a totally clear sky, and the sun had just set. There was still plenty of light in the sky. Maybe it's just some sort of cloud or wavelength that's more visible from an angle. No idea. Not the first weird thing I've seen in this area though. This happened way back in late 1989 or early 1990. At the time, I lived in Santa Fe, Texas, and drove my then boyfriend back and forth to work in Alvin, along Business 35 at Avenue I and Steel Road. It was getting close to sunset, and as evening is my favorite time of day, I had parked facing the west between a low-roof building and some kind of structure, something like a radio tower with a blinking red light at the top. While drinking my usual coffee, I noticed some movement in the distance. I thought it might be some herons and became more interested since I like watching large birds fly. The closer they got, however, the less they looked like birds of any kind. As I watched them come into view, it turned out that what I was looking at wasn't anything living, at least not how we think of things that have flesh and blood. These were just balls. 5 chrome balls, about 3 or 4 feet in diameter, perfectly round, flying in a V formation. They were gliding silently and steadily along. No variation in space or speed in any direction, just staying the course, roughly 50 feet above the ground. As they got above the truck I was driving, I sat on the door's window opening and watched as they flew past and right in line with the road behind me. It was so amazing and confusing, I had to resist the almost overwhelming urge to start the truck and follow them to wherever they were going. My eyes never left them except to blink. The entire time watching was spent trying to identify what the hell they were. It's never far from my mind for long, and it drives me crazy sometimes. I have never heard of anything similar. Has anyone experienced anything like that? Anyone in the area that may have seen the same thing? It was around rush hour, so I wouldn't think there were many people looking up at the sky. I've been doing some reading on here, and it made me want to post. I've been seeing black masses lately. They emanate from my walls and run out of the corner of my eye. I've been taking anti-anxiety and antidepressants since the 6th grade. Recently, around 6 years later, I've been able to start dropping some of my medications. I used to see these masses when I was younger, but not a lot. I can have very predictive dreams. Some I can remember and some I can't, which always come to reality eventually. My father has always told me stories about my grandmother and how she was a sensitive. I have never met her as she was terminally ill and passed when my father was 24, 16 years before I was born. She could hold a random object and tell you facts about it, and she was an overall feisty and spiritual person. Her baby picture and my own are almost identical. He says he can see his mother in me. My father has also said that he saw her out the corner of his eye when my older sister and myself were born, 7 years apart. I was emptying our dishwasher and placed a drinking glass in the cabinet. Now I'd like to state that the dishes were room temperature, so a temp fluctuation wouldn't make sense. I reached down to grab another and put it away, and when I put it down, the first glass exploded. It sent glass everywhere, on the floor and all over me. I wasn't injured, thankfully. My dad was in the kitchen as well, and only heard my scream. No one saw or heard the shatter, only me. Before I started my medication, when I was seeing the masses the first time, I woke up to see one. It was standing in front of my nightlight, staring down at me. It was solid black and had a wavy silhouette. I dove under the covers and said a prayer. It's important to know, my family's not religious in any way, so it was just me rambling in my mind. Last night, June 9th, 2020, I saw masses coming out of my walls. When I see them, I'm not scared. I'm confused and anxious, but I've never felt threatened. I want to understand more, but in a safe way. Before anyone says I should go back on my medications, I'd like to state that I can't, for personal reasons. Please PM me or comment. I really need your help. Thank you.